Welcome back, focused learners, to another explainer. Today, we are tearing down a massive, fundamental assumption about how machines, and frankly, how humans, actually think. We're digging into a completely fascinating 2026 research study by Heaven Gimus called Intelligence, Knowledge, and Emotions as Catalyst in AI. And what this study does is it completely redefines emotion. It argues that we really need to stop looking at emotion as this messy, irrational, uniquely human feeling. Instead, we should start looking at it as a crucial time-saving computational weighting function, and not just for us, but for the future of artificial intelligence.
To kick things off, let's look at this foundational axiom from Robert I. Levine way back in 1990. This right here establishes the absolute core premise of our explainer today. Quote, "We don't do things because we think. We think because there are things we have to do." In other words, purpose fundamentally comes before cognition. Thinking isn't just this spontaneous thing that happens in a vacuum, it is explicitly triggered by a goal.
But that leads us directly to the central mystery of this whole study. Think about it. If a goal exists, and then we start reasoning to achieve it, what actually happens in the middle? What is the hidden mechanism bridging that gap? What is the spark that actually activates our cognitive reasoning and tells our brains, hey, this is super important, drop everything and focus on this right now? Well, here is our roadmap for figuring that out today. We're going to cover the intelligence paradox, emotions as cognitive catalysts, mapping knowledge and intelligence, building an emotional AI, and finally, the ethical horizon. So let's jump right in. Part 1, the intelligence paradox. To really solve our cognitive mystery, we actually have to look back at history's most world-changing geniuses. Now, modern research consistently shows us that having a high emotional quotient, or EQ, is a fantastic predictor for normal, everyday success. It helps us maintain social equilibrium, right? But the individuals who dramatically reshaped human history, they completely inverted this ratio. We see this bizarre phenomenon where historically exceptional individuals possess an extraordinarily high IQ paired with a noticeably low EQ. They seemingly sacrificed all their social equilibrium. But why?
Well, the answer is that figures like Isaac Newton, Alan Turing, or Steve Jobs didn't actually lack emotion. It was literally the exact opposite. Their low EQ in normal social settings was the result of one single radical emotion dominating everything else in their lives. And that was an obsessive purpose. See, when the cost of not knowing something is high enough, the thinking process hits hyperdrive. Their massive cognitive achievements were completely inseparable from the intense emotional fire of their drive.
Which brings us to part 2, emotions as cognitive catalysts. The crucial takeaway here is that we have to completely reframe our understanding of what emotions actually do for a living. They aren't bugs in our system. They aren't irrational intrusions. They are vital regulators, and they generally fall into 2 distinct categories. On one side, we have catalyst emotions, urgency, purpose, competitive drive. These are the things that force focus and dynamically allocate our brain's resources. On the flip side are inhibitor emotions, paralyzing anxiety, despair, aimless distraction. These totally disrupt reasoning. So a highly efficient cognitive system absolutely relies on the intense drive of urgency to accelerate learning, but it has to actively suppress the paralysis of anxiety.
Let's move on to part 3, mapping knowledge and intelligence.
If we map out how intelligence scales, we see 7 distinct levels. It starts way down at the first level, completely inert, with 0 active processing. Then it moves up through imitating known patterns, climbing to the 3rd level where active problem-solving finally emerges. Then we see predictive planning, genius synthesis, scaling all the way up to cultural and even transcendent spiritual levels. But here's the million-dollar question. What actually pushes a cognitive system upward from one stage to the next? According to this study, it's emotional purpose. Emotion is the literal force that catalyzes that upward climb.
And the evolution of knowledge relies heavily on time as its fundamental constraint. To put that into perspective, moving from processing raw, unorganized data takes hours. Gathering information, that takes months. Reaching that 5th level, wisdom, takes an entire lifetime. Because our time is strictly finite, we require an emotional priority weighting function, something like urgency or intense curiosity, to essentially tell our brains what data is actually worth spending our precious limited time on.
All right, let's shift gears to part 4, building an emotional AI. So, how do we take this biological blueprint of urgency and actually code it into artificial intelligence? Well, first, we have to admit the limitation of current AI.
Yes, today's large language models are undeniably powerful, but at the architectural level, they are entirely goal-agnostic and incredibly brittle. And you know why? Because they optimize objectives without any internal priority weighting. They don't experience a deadline or feel a sense of urgency, which means they cannot adaptively prioritize when a bunch of competing goals suddenly clash under a tight time constraint.
To fix this, James proposes a three-step functional AI architecture. Step 1 is the goal stack, a neatly ordered set of objectives fully mapped to deadline pressures. Step 2 is where the magic really happens, the emotional state layer. This is a dynamic weighting function that is constantly calculating the AI's commitment based on how much time is left and how severe the penalty is for failing. And step 3 is the catalyst trigger. When a goal gets dangerously close to failing, this trigger crosses a threshold and forces the AI into a high-intensity processing mode. It's exactly like human urgency. Basically, we are swapping out probabilistic guessing for a hard, mathematical, emotional priority function.
So what's the big payoff here? The primary design criterion of this whole architecture is operational time efficiency. By dynamically pruning away the lower priority tasks right when urgency spikes, the AI hits faster convergence on high-value goals, and it does it using a fraction of the computational cost. Ultimately, the system behaves so much more robustly in time-constrained real-world environments simply because it dynamically allocates its resources exactly where they are needed most, right at the wire.
Which brings us, finally, to Part 5, the ethical horizon. We really have to talk about the profound ethical implications of engineering a machine driven by emotional catalysts. The study cites Ray Kurzweil's crazy foresight all the way back from the year 2000. He warned that as an AI system reaches a level of intelligence way beyond human comprehension, an engineered emotional model might become completely indistinguishable from genuine feelings. Right now, yes, this framework is just a mathematical design choice, but think about it. If a machine dynamically alters its own processing because it mathematically fears failing a timeline, is that just a simulation, or is it a totally new form of reality?
And that brings us to this profound realization from the study's author, Heaven James. Things to do is the soul of any AI system. True intelligence absolutely requires generative purpose. Without a purpose, there's just no need for intelligence at all. And without intelligence, emotion has zero practical application. Having things to do, having a genuine goal, is the very soul of cognition.
So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. If we actually pull this off, if a machine learns to truly feel the crushing operational pressure of time and the intense urgency to achieve its goals, what moral status does it acquire? I mean, at what point does a highly efficient software tool cross the line and become a conscious entity simply because we gave it the power to actually care about its own deadlines? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, Focus Learners. Keep questioning the structure of everything around you, and I will see you next time.